Right, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Pete Brown. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this. It's a very, very different sort of webinar, and it connects two very things that are very sort of passionate to me, and I'm very involved in. That's beer and music. Um, so welcome, Pete. It's great to see you. Welcome to EBCU, and I'm
Thank
going to
you.
hand over now to you so you can tell us all about this topic. Thanks very much, Pete.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to do this. I'm just going to bring my presentation up. It's quite a visual presentation, you'll be happy to hear. There we go. So, right. So this is really great timing. This is my new book. This is the cover of the new book, and it's being published by Camera Books on Thursday. Hopefully, we may even have copies in the warehouse by then. You may have noticed we've got different beer styles with different names of artists. This is the printed copy I have at the moment, and at the bottom here on the screen you can see Dizzy Rascal, spelled D-I-Z-Z-E, and here it's spelled D-I-Z-Z-I-E. So 3,500 copies of this have just been pulped, and a complete reprint has had to happen. We don't know how that typo got on there. This is the copy we signed off in January. So it's always exciting when you're publishing a book. So what is this about? Now, I was asked to do this because Brett and I think a couple of other people who are on the call saw me do a presentation here in Norwich back in, was it October, November? Um, and um, and it's a presentation I've been doing for quite a few years. And this book is kind of it normally works the other way around. Normally you have a book and then you do a talk based on the book. This is a book based on a talk. Let me just give you a bit of a background. So this is not the chart I thought it was going to be. Okay, that's cool. My charts don't seem to be in the right order. That's great. So, like Brett, my two big passions are beer and music. I wanted to be I'm a music sorry, I'm a beer writer. I wanted to be a music writer before I was a beer writer. And the two go together for me in ways that we'll talk about. Um, but this association and the work that I do here goes back to 2010. If you cast your mind back to then, the craft beer movement was really taking off. Here in the UK, cask ale was actually sort of returning to growth. We had beer blogging, and beer writing was suddenly kind of freed, unleashed, and we had this community online of writers, brewers, everyone talking away, and there was a real enthusiasm around promoting beer, in which felt very new and exciting at the time. And and one of the ways that was manifesting itself was in beer and food pairing, which I thought was a really interesting idea. I wrote a lot of articles about it. Garrett Oliver wrote one of the best books of all time regarding beer about it. And people were having dinners and events. I certainly hosted a few. And there was a bit of a backlash. There was a backlash from the wine community, because there was this idea that beer is inferior to wine, and that wine pairs with food. And how can beer pair with food? But what I thought was odd at the time, there was also a backlash from some elements of the beer community. There are certain people, certain groups within beer who, for them, beer it's unpretentious, it's straightforward, it's easy, and the idea of pairing beer with food felt a bit pretentious to them. Why were we making it all complicated? I mean, look at that slide. Look at that chart that the Brewers Association done. That's and I agree to an extent. That is not about drinking beer. That's too much like hard work, and we drink beer as a form of relaxation. Uh, but this idea that pairing beer with food doesn't work struck me as really odd. Um, every single recipe in the history of humanity And every single menu in the history of humanity has been based on one simple principle, which is that some flavors go together more nicely than other flavors. And the idea that beer might be somehow not part of that is absurd when you think about it. Of course, the flavors in beer are going to pair better with some things than others. And so I have quite a mischievous streak in my writing and in what I do with beer. And when I saw people calling this pretentious, I said, "You want to see pretentious? I'll show you pretentious." Um, if you think beer and food matching is pretentious, I'm going to do beer and music matching. And it started off as a joke, and I thought it was a joke. And then I found out that actually it wasn't a joke. Um, I did my wife runs a literary festival, and she said, "Have you got an event you can do in a room above a pub?" And I said, "Yes, of course I have." So I stood up with my iPhone plugged into a speaker, and I said, "I'm going to play you some tunes, and I'm going to pair some beers with them." I was making it up as I went along, and my favorite band is New Order. And I basically started off my first ever presentation doing this, saying, "What kind of beer pairs with New Order?" And I said, "Well, every single beer that's great that's ever been brewed goes with New Order because New Order are the best band of all time." And people sat there, they were given free beers, they tolerated this, they listened to my music, and then went away and went, "Thank you very much." And so I was playing my favorite tunes and drinking my favorite beers, basically taking advantage of the audience who turned up for it. So I did that for a couple of years or so, and people still carried on coming to the events. And then I met this guy. The guy on the right is Professor Charles Spence. And I did an event, and he came up to me after the event and said, "You do realize that this is very, very similar to experiments that we're conducting at Oxford University?" And I went, "No way. That's ridiculous." He does this science called neurogastronomy. Well, he doesn't call it that. It's kind of a cross between neuroscience, physics, chemistry, philosophy. And basically, it's this idea that our senses aren't separate from each other. They interfere with each other, they overlap with each other. He's been doing things, if you've heard of Heston Blumenthal's restaurant, The Fat Duck, where you order a seafood dish and you get given headphones that play the sound of the sea. And the seafood tastes fresher. He's done experiments with Pringles, where people eat Pringles and they're wearing headphones, and he turns up the volume of the crunching sound in your ears, and the louder the crunching sound, the more people think the Pringles taste fresher. He's done an experiment with 7 Up, the soda, where they made the green on the cans a little bit more yellow, and people said that it tasted more lemony. So there's all this weird stuff going on. And so I started reading his work and realized that I'd stumbled across something that was actual science. And so I started to incorporate a little bit of this into my events as well. And I was wondering why this is the case. And so coming right back to beer, um, I'm sure we've all been in a situation where when you're talking about the flavor of beer, where you attempt to describe the flavor of beer, or if you're running a tutor tasting yourself and you ask the audience what they can taste, people will say, "Well, it tastes of beer." And we have a very limited vocabulary around around describing flavor. So I did a thing I do think quite often where we're sitting there and we get a beer, and I say, "Can you describe how this beer looks?" And the person who's with me can probably talk for 2 or 3 minutes about how this beer looks. It's in a glass with a stem. It's slightly hazy. It's kind of caramel colored. There's a bit of foam on the top. You can't quite see through it. Da 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 da. It's about and then you say, "What does it taste like?" "Well, it tastes of beer." And this aroused my curiosity a little bit. And when I started researching this book in a bit more detail after meeting Charles Spence, it turns out that we have this hierarchy of the senses. And this goes right back to ancient Greece. This goes back to Aristotle and Plato and people like that, where philosophically, hearing and sight are higher order senses. This is how we appreciate art. It's how we hear the word of God. It's how we appreciate music, opera, and they're also kind of far away from us. This is us seeing things and hearing things that are separate from us. Whereas smell, taste, and touch are animal senses. They're about our bodies, they're about appetites, they're about things like sex, eating, and these were always the lower order senses. So our language around smell and taste is really not as well developed as it is around hearing and sight. And this is true across all languages, all cultures around the world. So we struggle to describe smell and taste. And we don't really know as much about them as we do about hearing and sight. And I found this is me the way I write a book, is I just start following these threads and just see where they lead me. I should say at this point, I meant to say up front, uh, Brett saw a very different presentation from this back last year. I'm not allowed to play you music on this call because of copyright issues, and also we don't all have the same beers. So what I'm doing today is giving you the theory behind it. I'm giving you what's in the book, and I'm giving you the tools that you need to go away and try this for yourself as soon as we've finished, or whenever you like. Sound and vision are this is where, because I said they're the higher order senses, this is where a lot of the science has been done so far. And it's been done in beer as well. So the guy on the left is a guy called Barney. He has a brewery in Edinburgh, and it's on an old university campus. He's very involved with the Edinburgh Science Festival. And around the same time I was starting to do my experiments, he did one with Professor Charles Spence, who we just saw on the previous slide. So Barney brewed this beer. It's a pale ale, and they had three different versions of it. One was packaged in plain brown paper. One was packaged with a label at the top, which has got a lot of red and sort of orange in it. And one was packaged in the label at the bottom with lots of lime green and bright yellow. And people were given these three beers, and they were asked to rate them in terms of how citrusy they were, how much they liked the taste, how likely they would be to buy the beer again, and how likely they would be to recommend it to friends. Now, the beer with the yellow and the green on the label scored 40% higher on all those measures than the plain beer or the beer at the top. Of course, it was the same beer. The beer was brewed, it was put into bottles before they were labeled. The labels were applied randomly, but everyone who tasted the beer in the bottom right thought it tasted better. The label changed the flavor of the beer. And this is written up in a scientific paper. The results were accurate and recorded. What we see changes our perception of what we think we taste. So I thought that was quite interesting. And it's all about how we taste. If you haven't run tasting events yourselves, you've certainly been to plenty of them. We always talk about how we sniff and swirl the beer first, where we get all the aromas. How aroma is more about it contributes more to flavor than taste does. Then we taste and we get all the flavor on our taste buds. And this is something that I do in my events, which might be worth trying. There's an experiment here which can prove that our brains don't perceive flavor accurately. Because what this shows is that obviously sorry, let me go back a second. If you had to drink a very flavorful aromatic beer, but to do this, you don't get very much. But then when you take your fingers away from your nose, suddenly you can get all the subtleties and all the complexity of it. That's because of retronasal olfaction. When the beer's in your mouth, the aroma compounds, as you breathe out through your nose, go up. Sorry, I'm pointing at the diagram. You can't see me pointing. But if beer's in your mouth and you're breathing out through your nose because you have your mouth closed, you get a much deeper sensory appreciation of the beer than you do just from sniffing it when you swirl it in the glass. And when you do this experiment, your brain, normally when you drink or eat anything, your brain tells you that you're perceiving the flavor in your mouth because that's where the food or drink is. When you do this, what that proves is you're actually perceiving most of the flavor in your nose. The olfactory tract, the olfactory bulb, is actually picking up about 80% of your perception of flavor, but your brain is telling you it's your mouth that's perceiving the flavor. So our brain doesn't know how we taste. So how do we know that the brain is perceiving the truth? Then I got into how we hear this, and this is less directly relevant to this group, but I was fascinated by how hearing works. I had to do a lot of research because I didn't really know. And you may know, but sound is waves of compressed air of higher pressure and lower pressure. That's what sound is. There's this philosophical question of if a tree falls down in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? It's a very simple question of physics. No, it doesn't. If there's not recording equipment or ears there to hear, there is no sound. There's just waves of air. It's only our ears that turn it into what we perceive as sound. There is no sound at all outside our heads. Sound does not exist in the outside world. It only exists in our brains. And it's a very, very, very complicated. This is so bloody weird. So waves go into our ears, and all this stuff in the ear turns it into a perception of sound. It turns it into electronic signals which go to the brain, and then the brain interprets that as sound, as music, as something we like, something we don't like. I'm going to skip the complicated explanation. It's all in the book. But when these compressed waves of air hit our ear, almost instantaneously, we can tell we can tell what instrument is playing. We can tell how loud it is. We can tell which direction it's hitting us from. We can tell whether it's in tune or not. We can tell what the voices are. We can interpret lyrics. And when I was doing my research, so the sound wave bit, okay, I understand that. The way this works, the way the ear works, I can understand that. How the brain then interprets that into our perception of music or sound, no one knows how that works. We know more about how the universe was created than we know about how you tell the difference between a trumpet and a guitar. So the reason I'm getting into all this is to say we don't really understand, we can't really describe how taste and flavor work. We have no idea how hearing works, really. So how do we know? How can we say that they don't interfere with each other? How can we say that they don't influence each other? Because we have no idea really what's going on with either of them. So I started to pair beer and music before I knew a lot of this. But I'm going to talk you through some different ways in which this works because it really is true. And people are very skeptical about it to start with. But once we get into it, it's fascinating how it works. These are 5 different ways that I'm just going to talk you through. So first, pairing by intuition. This is something we all do all the time. And it's how I started doing this when I first started. If you've made a mixtape, a playlist, anything like that, you've chosen music that's appropriate to the situation you want it for. If you have a playlist that you play on your headphones when you're in a gym, and you have a playlist that you play in the background when you're having dinner, it's going to be different kinds of music because some music suits this, some music suits this. If you've watched any television or film in your life, you've heard how different styles of music create different moods, different emotions. We know the music that creates a sense of danger, the music that's romantic. And so I used that principle when I first started. And here's one of the very first pairings I did. There's no science to this. This is just intuition. For me, Asahi, a very, very dry lager. Some of you may say completely tasteless. I would say dry and delicate. There's nothing wasted in it. It's about Japanese efficiency. It's about everything being stripped down and efficient. The music of Kraftwerk is very similar. A lot of Kraftwerk's music is about what's between the notes rather than what the notes actually are. There's nothing wasted. That cover is minimalist. So for me, intuitively, a beer like Asahi and music like Kraftwerk just seem to go together because they're a similar aesthetic. It's as simple as that. Of course, with this kind of very simple aesthetic, you can start making jokes with it as well and being less than serious. Uh, I do this in my pairings all the time. I compare Stella Artois with U2's The Joshua Tree because whereas this one, it's about both being minimalist, stripped down, and efficient. With this one, it's about both being once having been something that had some kind of integrity and meaning, and now being totally sold out purely for commercial gain. And that usually gets a big laugh when you do this in a live audience. Ed Sheeran with Corona, obviously, because Corona is a beer for people who don't like the taste of beer, and Ed Sheeran makes music for people who don't like music. You can go on and on. You can go on and on with this, and I do. And it's easy, and it's cheap, and it's it's just scoring open goals basically. So this is where I started when I was doing my events, having a lot of fun, doing a lot of jokes, a lot of bad jokes, but you know that's what we're here for. But anyone can do this, as I said, and you probably kind of sit and do this with beers and music on your own. But then I realized that there was more to it than that. Pairing beer by context is sort of the same thing but different. Context has a massive effect on what we think our senses are telling us. I'm sure we've all had the situation where you're on holiday, you're somewhere warm and beautiful. You have, it might be a beer, it might be a wine, it might be the local spirit, it might be schnapps or grappa or something like that. And you think, this is great, this is gorgeous. And you buy a bottle and you take home and you open it at home and it's Tuesday and it's raining and you go, shit, this is awful. How come I ever thought it tasted good when I was on holiday? We all do it. It's not you being silly. The environment, the context makes a huge difference to your perception of flavor. Beer is created. Beer creates context as well as being influenced by context. And this picture here illustrates this point perfectly. This is a bad pint of Peroni in a dirty Sharps Doom Bar glass. And it is the best pint of beer I've ever tasted. How can that be the best pint of beer I've ever tasted? Because it was the first pint I had in a pub after 4 months of lockdown. So it didn't matter what it looked like, what it tasted like. I was in a pub for the first time in 4 months. It tasted beautiful. Music creates context and atmosphere. Like I said, with our mood tapes that we make, we do it all the time. There's been a lot of research into this in restaurants. If you play loud, fast music, people eat quicker. And they leave quicker. So if you're a very busy restaurant, play something loud and noisy. Um, if you play something slow and mellow, people stay longer, and their drinks bill on average is 20% higher. And this has been proven by playing different music in the same restaurants as similar groups of people. I often think about this in terms of pubs. I don't know about where you are, but certainly a lot of UK craft beer pubs these days, the staff are free to put their own Spotify playlists on. I'm often in a pub at lunchtime with my wife, and we're the only two people in there, and someone's playing Metallica at full volume. We don't stay. They lose money because of that playlist. If you've ever been in a place, a bar, a restaurant, a pub, where the playlist is only 30 minutes long, say, and so you're sitting there chatting away, and then you go, oh, we've already heard this. It's going round again. If it comes round for a third time, you go, oh, we've been here too long. We'd better go. And so again, you're actually driving people away. Whereas a clever choice of music can create the right context that makes people spend more, that makes people stay longer. So I was doing a lot of that. And then I discovered the science that Charles was talking about, priming words that we use in different ways depending on what we're talking about. So picture there, there's a smooth object, there's a rough object. Certainly in English, we could say that music is smooth or rough, We could say that flavor is smooth or rough. We could say that mouthfeel is smooth or rough. We could say that someone looks smooth or looks rough. We use these words in different ways. We use them in senses that they're not originally made for. And I found this experiment that was done at Heriot-Watt University in 2010 that proved that this has a real influence. If you think about flavor and if you think about sound, you can use the same words to describe similar flavor, different flavors and different sounds. So you can describe certain styles of music as mellow and soft. You describe certain flavors as mellow and soft, or zingy and refreshing, or powerful and heavy. So this was an experiment where there were 6 groups of people, uh, 3 drinking white wine, which was a Pinot Grigio, and 3 drinking a Cabernet Sauvignon. Uh, Group 1 with each was drinking in silence, and they were asked to rate the flavor of the wine. The second group was played music that was wrong for the wine, if you like. So you could say that the Pinot Grigio is zingy and refreshing, and you play mellow and soft music. And then the third group was zingy and refreshing music, zingy and refreshing wine. And what happened here was that when the white wine group was played mellow and soft music, they rated the flavor 26% better, more highly than the group that was listening in silence. With the red wine, similar thing, 25% better. So this is suggesting to us that drinking with any music at all instead of silence is making the wine taste better. But then when the white wine, the zingy refreshing white wine, was played with zingy and refreshing music, it tasted 40% better. And when the powerful and heavy wine, the Cabernet Sauvignon, was drunk listening to powerful and heavy music, it tasted 60% better than it did to the people drinking it in silence. So here was the first proof, really, that music was changing people's perception of the flavor of wine. And I looked at that and I said, why are you using wine? Let's do it with beer instead. And this is what really got me going. So here is an example of this. There's a town just outside Manchester called Stockport, and Stockport is now getting quite cool, actually. But for a long time, it was a post-industrial town. It used to make lots of hats, and then all the hat factories closed, and there was nothing there except this kind of typically English British industrial landscape. But Stockport is home to Robinson's Brewery. Robinson's make a beer called Old Tom, which was first brewed in 1899. It's a strong ale. It's very dark. It's really quite potent and quite a wonderful beer. And of course, the album sleeve on the right is Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures. So Old Tom has been brewed in Stockport for 125 years. Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures was recorded in Strawberry Studios in Stockport. Now, have a look at the town again. It's fairly grim, it's fairly dark. I can describe that beer and that album as dark, heavy, complex, brooding, uh, uh, and they apply to the beer in a different way than they apply to the music, but the same words can describe both. If the picture in the background was rolling wheat fields or a beautiful mountain landscape, I don't think the beer or the album would have been quite the same as they are. I think the place impacted both. So next, I moved on from that and found some stuff on pairing by musical pitch. Now, this is really, really weird. This is where it starts to get really quite interesting. Is there a relationship between different flavors and different musical pitch? Now, why would there be? I'm sure you don't think there is. But if I ask you, is lemon high pitched or low pitched? You're probably going to say high, I'm guessing. If I ask you if tobacco is high pitched or low pitched, you're probably going to say it's low pitched. So we all have this internal understanding that there's a correlation between different flavors and different musical pitch. Why? Nobody knows. But it's true, it's there. The first people to explore this, now, something on the cultural aspect, this is very interesting. Most of the scientific research that's been done for this, I've looked at 300 scientific papers in this area of the crossing over the senses. Almost all of them, when they're doing this, between flavor and music, they use wine and classical music because that's serious. You know, if it was beer and pop music, somehow that's not important enough. It's too trivial. But it turns out that the very, very first experiments in this were done in 1968 at the Carlsberg Brewery. And what they did was they had Carlsberg Pilsner and Carlsberg Elephant Beer, which I'm sure you know is quite a strong lager. And they gave people wearing headphones. They got the both beers, and they had a dial tone that made a musical pitch note where you could turn it to high pitch or lower pitch. And they said, find the pitch that you find best goes with Pilsner and find the pitch that best goes with Elephant Beer. And everyone who did this found that Pilsner had a lower pitch, no, a higher pitch than Elephant Beer. Um, this is one quote from now. This was done in 1976, this experiment, and I think that might have something to do with the words here. My right hand with a glass of beer in it trembled violently, that I was suddenly afraid of dropping it. I felt I was floating in the air. The tone was intensified to such a degree that it sounded like a symphony orchestra, and the room was filled with jaws. My jaws were moving out with the rhythm of the tone. Maybe this person had been taking something stronger than beer before they went into the experiment, but they definitely felt that there was a relationship, and that relationship was consistent across the whole sample. So here are some different flavors. It's pineapple high pitched or low pitched, is mushroom high pitched or low pitched. When this was done in a scientific experiment, we get this. So citrus flavors tend to be high pitched, smoky, chocolatey, darker. I would say darker flavors tend to be lower pitched. So if this is true, which it is, because obviously you can see the label on the right hand side says Western musical scale. We don't yet know whether this crosses cultures, but certainly everyone who's grown up in the Western musical tradition of kind of European classical music, followed by pop music, rock music, and so on, this is consistent across European, North American countries. I think it may be slightly different if you go to kind of Asian countries, but we're not quite sure yet, where musical scales are different. But we have this really clear delineation of the relationship between pitch and musical scales. And this means, obviously, that if I play something very low pitched, some kind of deep bass, something maybe with kind of cellos and violas, that kind of thing, then it's going to pair better with smoky, chocolatey flavors. If I've got something that's very bright and fruity with lemon, citrus, that kind of thing, it's going to go with high pitched music. And so this is another experiment that I do, and it works every time. So here's an example. Johnny Cash, towards the end of his career, did these albums with I've forgotten his name, American producer guy, and it was very dark. By this point, Johnny Cash's voice was it's kind of broken and hollowed out. It's almost like his vocal cords have turned to mahogany or teak. It's like his whole insides have solidified. Very deep, very low, very cracked. And so that's not going to go with citrusy flavors. It's going to go with something like a really nice deep stout. And when I do this, it works perfectly. And then we get really complicated. This is where we get into the not complicated, but fascinating. Basic tastes. There's been a lot of work done on this again with wine, and I've stolen it and used it for beer and found that my results are incredibly consistent. This is based on a theory that if you take the sweet, sour, salty, bitter, that they have different musical styles that correspond to them. And the way this was worked out and developed, these guys in Argentina recruited 14 different musicians, classical, pop, rock, country, folk, jazz, across all genres. They gave them a list of about 24 words. These included sweet, sour, salty, bitter, but they also included happy, angry, uh, contemplative, lots of different words, and said, could you improvise music to these different words? And then they got rid of the rest of them, said, well, what have we got with sweet, sour, salty, bitter? And they found this remarkable correspondence across all the different musicians, whatever genre they were playing in. Whoever the musician was, when they composed, when they improvised the sweet, the music was high pitched, melodic, harmonious. When they were composed to sour, it was high pitched, dissonant, atonal, and so on. What they then did was take these compositions, recruit about 60 non-musicians, and played these compositions back to them and said, some of these compositions are sweet, some are sour, some are salty, some are bitter. Which one do you think is which? And the non-musicians picked exactly the right ones. And so this is what I do on stage all the time. I give people, so let's take sour. In fact, have I done this? Yeah. So yeah. Um, Television marquee moon. So here, salty, short duration, high articulation staccato. So Marquee Moon, if you don't know it, Spotify it as soon as we get off this call. It's amazing. If you do know it, the guitar is like did it, did it. It's very staccato. It's very choppy, and so the theory is that should go with a salty beer. So I pair this with a salty kiss, which is a goza, and it works well. When I do this experiment, I give people the four. I give people sweet, sour, salty, bitter. I also give them the option of, I don't know, you're making this up. There's no relationship here whatsoever. Just stop it. And so if this was completely random, I should be getting 20% against each of those five alternatives. When I do this, I get 40 to 45% of people saying, yeah, I think that's salty. I think that's a salty tune. Um, Sour beer. So sour is high-pitched, dissonant, atonal. In the words of a classic Morecambe and Wise sketch here in the UK, maybe it is the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order. So Dizzy Rascal, Bonkers, the riff for Bonkers goes a bit like it's really atonal and dissonant. And I pair that with a sour beer. And what's interesting, there's two things that are interesting here. I'd say that Bonkers is reasonably dissonant, but not incredibly dissonant. It's still got a tune. You can still kind of nod your head to it. If you pair that song with, say, Cantion's Rosé de Gambrinus, the sourness is bigger than the dissonance, and it doesn't quite work. But if you get reasonably dissonant and reasonably sour, it kind of works. And what happens is the sourness in the beer disappears, and the fruitiness comes out a lot more. And people kind of tend to kind of get on with the music a little bit better. Most of the events that I do, the songs a little bit not quite the target audience, not quite the audience's cup of tea. So that they do struggle with this one a little bit, but they do also think that it pairs with sour. And then you can get a bit more interesting with it and get a bit more creative with it. This is a picture from a pop-up restaurant called House of Wolf that was in Islington in North London. And what you've got here is it's a coffee ice cream lollipop covered with sweet milk chocolate and candy sprinkles. So when you bite into this, you're getting bitterness and you're getting sweetness. So I thought, I know a beer that does that as well. So if I was to get something like a Sierra Nevada Torpedo IPA, a classic West Coast IPA. I'm drinking a West Coast IPA right now. There's a lot of fruity sweetness on the nose. I'm getting the hop characters when I first drink, but also then at the end, I'm getting the assertive bitterness. So what we can do, what happened here was there were telephones on the table, and diners could dial one, and they got music that in theory brought out the sweetness, and they dialed two and got music that in theory brought out the bitterness. So I do this myself. Ronette's Be My Baby. Sweetness, let's go back here. Sweetness is high-pitched, melodic, harmonious. Girl group vocal harmonies. Perfect. High-pitched, melodic, harmonious. Bitter, low-pitched, legato, and smooth. So we've got on the left, sweetness, close vocal harmonies. On the right, Billie Eilish. Her voice is deep, it's smoky. This track has got lots of very, very deep strings on it, lots of bass. So the idea here is that I play the first song and the beer tastes sweeter. I play the second song and the beer tastes more bitter. So when I do this, people are like, okay. And then I ask people afterwards, and I'd say about 70% of people go, yeah, it tasted more bitter with Billie Eilish, it tasted sweeter with Ronettes. So here we've got to the point where by changing the music, I'm changing the flavour of a single beer. Now, at the start, that just sounds completely far-fetched and outrageous, but trust me, give it a try. It really works. Beyond that, there's this idea that perception depends on previous experience. So these effects are real. This really happens. But this is not the only thing that's going on in your life. You have your own musical preferences. You have your own beer preferences. If if there was a song, if "Be My Baby" was the song that you first got together with your partner listening to, and Billie Eilish, you broke up with that partner while that song was playing, those things are going to have an effect. Those things are in your mind. They're going to override the effects that are happening on your palate. And I always like to talk about this example of this very thing. Our brains are wired up differently. So our own experience can have a massive effect on this. I hope some of you have had Maelstrom by Snab. It's no longer being brewed, but I discovered this beer in 2006 in Amsterdam and loved it. And an American style, no, sorry, a British style barley wine brewed with American hops by a Dutch brewing collective. I had to give this a go. So I was in Amsterdam in Arend's Nest with my wife, and we poured 2 glasses from this bottle, and we did all the sniffing. And Liz said, "That smells like Parma violets," and I said, "That smells like walking through a pine forest." This is the same beer from the same bottle. Parma violets smell nothing like pine forests. So what's happening here? Um, I this is some of the jokes sometimes lose something over Zoom, but I like to compare this to what I call the Estevez conundrum, whereby Charlie Sheen and Emilio Estevez are brothers. They look nothing like each other, but they both look exactly like their dad, Martin Sheen. So it's another example of this kind of weird thing that's going on. So what was going on here? It was a similar thing to that. We're both getting different things, and it's because our brains were working differently. These are brain scans. This is actually quite a new technology, relatively speaking. This has been around for 20, 25 years. What we know, what neuroscientists know, is that different parts of the brain work with different functions. So there's a part that does memory, there's a part that does appetite, there's a part that does danger, and so on. And when you're using a certain part of the brain, more blood flows to that part of the brain, which means that it's hotter. So these are heat maps of the brain. You know, the orange and yellow bits, they're the parts of the brain that are being particularly engaged. Now, this is the same brain. It's the brain of a jazz musician. And in the top set of scans, that musician is being asked to play scales. Now, the deeply learned activity, something that you learn by rote to the point where you don't even think about it while you're doing it. And the bottom set of scans, they're playing improv. So there's the creativity there. There's letting the brain run free. There's a certain part of the brain, I forgot what it's called, but it's the part of the brain where if you if a thought comes into your head that's not a very nice thing to say, it's the part of the brain that stops you from saying it. So you think, Christ, you look terrible. It's the part of the brain that stops that coming out of your mouth. That gets completely switched off when we're doing improvisation, when we're doing creativity, because it's an impediment to creativity. Whereas it's there with scales because it's a learned activity. And so playing scales versus playing improv, very, very different brain activity from playing music in 2 different ways. And this is, where's that going? No, no, no. This is what was happening with me and Liz here. So at the time we drank this beer, I I'd just done this was 20 years ago. I'd just done my first sensory training in beer about 3 weeks before this. For the first time, I'd learned how to taste properly. I'd learned what flavors to look for. I'd got, and I was thrilled to acquire this knowledge. So if we'd had these scans going when we were tasting this beer, what you would have seen in my brain is all the bits that are about recently acquired knowledge, learning, rational thinking, all those bits would have been firing up because I knew that North American hops are piney. And so I was looking for that and I found it. Now, Liz had not done any of this training. So she, in her brain, recently acquired knowledge and learning was dead because there was nothing there. So what she was doing was she was going to very, very deep memories. She was trying to find something somewhere that this reminded her of. And she got to Parma Violets. So it was a version of this. We were tasting the same beer, but we were using very, very different parts of our brain to analyze it. And so this is going on all the time. Whenever we're tasting anything, your previous experience, that thing where people get drunk on something at 18 and they're really, really sick, and then they never like the taste of that thing ever again. This all impacts. So this is like another layer over everything that I've spoken about so far. So that's kind of it. I'm looking forward to getting to some questions and chat. But basically the lesson here is that all our senses, they're not separate, they overlap. What we listen to influences what we taste. It can even change it. Sometimes they just correspond and you go, yeah, that goes with that goes with that, like music matching, like food matching rather. Other times it actually changes our perception of what we're tasting. So it's fascinating. The book is out on Thursday. You can order it from Camera or from Amazon or from anywhere else. The first half of the book goes through all that theory. The second half of the book is 45 different pairings. There's a Spotify playlist, which I'm sure we can share. I'm sure I can get Brett to share that. And it's 45 songs, 45 beers, and why I think they go together. But just to finish, just outside all that, beer and music both go back to the dawn of civilization. They're both very ceremonial in how we see and how we do them. They both mean a great deal to us. They're both about getting together as groups. They're both about celebration. They're both, to some extent, about our identity, how we choose to define ourselves. They become ritualized, but they're about celebration. They bring us together, and so they go together. I think that's apart from the science. I think that they just go together, and they should be celebrated together with the science. I think that helps you kind of understand why a little bit. But this is in its infancy. What I've just shown you is pretty much the cutting edge of where neuroscience is on all this stuff. And just as a writer, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is to kind of explore the limits of human knowledge and how it shapes us. So I'm going to stop sharing there. Thank you very much for listening, and we can have some questions. So I can just see the questions now.
Yeah, Pete, I think the first one was something you asked a question right at the start. I think it was it a producer and Kern
Rick
has
Rubin,
Rick Ruby.
of course it was. Thank you very much, Kern. Um, so Tina's question, this is a very interesting topic. I've observed different views on music being played at an example. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's both things. People have incredibly strong opinions about, so they can be divisive. I think they form us into tribes, definitely. Wolfgang X beer is to vinyl like Y beer is to CD. Interesting. Uh, I think that would vary depending on your previous experience. The first thing I'm thinking is kind of traditional formats versus new formats. Um, and for me, you mean it gets something like real ale and vinyl versus craft beer and Spotify, I guess. Kern says 2 years ago, I had a session music pairing at the, I'm not going to try and say that, Gosha Beer Fest, Hilversum, Netherlands. If I was with participants, a normal IPA with Bob Marley and two Slayer, great experiment. I always make a music set list at my taste sessions. So yeah, it's not just me then. We do we do think they go together. Even if we disagree on what goes with what, I think we all do something similar.
Yeah, Pete, I was going to mention that little story of I went to one of Pete's webinars at it was the Camera Gym in Torquay, and there was a group of four of us, and I took them along to this because I'd heard Pete speaking in Norwich, as he said. One of them got it, the other two were very skeptical and said, "We'll come along, but we're not convinced." Now, we went to a pub afterwards and we didn't realize at the time, but my friend was sitting there. And we were both drink. We were all three of us were drinking a golden ale from a south coast brewery, and it was about a 3.8% golden ale, quite hoppy, typical sort of slightly citrusy, and slightly sweet. And my friend's phone went, and he was the one that was most skeptical. He said, "Oh, I've just got to take this phone call." He took his beer and his phone outside, took the call, and that was it. But then 2 minutes later, he came back very animated, saying, "You're never going to guess what? Just take your beer outside and taste it and bring it inside." And what was the only difference was inside on the jukebox, the Sugar Babes were playing quite loud. Now, none of us liked the Sugar Babes particularly, but the key point about that was he suddenly convinced himself accidentally by listening to this record, which I thought was quite an interesting story.
It does work. It does work. It's all about context, but create context all the time. Um, I say, Claire Hunt, terrific talk, but sweet pair with high pitch is odd to me. How about sweet and low? That's interesting. Um, I think sweetness is it's the most powerful one. And the science suggests that a big part of what's happening is that obviously genetically and in evolutionary terms, we're programmed to love sweet things. It's sugar until, 100 years ago, we didn't have enough sugar in our diets. So if you get something sweet, we like it. And so sweetness gets linked in experiments with pleasant flavors. So with pleasant music. The sound of melodic, harmonious. Uh, I guess I'm saying that more than high pitched part of it. But because it's pleasant in a kind of fairly widespread way. That's part of why we link it with sweetness. Um, in beer and food pairing, the big surprise is when the two tasted together surpass either one on their own. Have you found anything similar when pairing beer and music? Yes, absolutely. Um, the greatest privilege of this book, of writing this book, has been it's forced me to listen to music in a different way. I've had to listen to it analytically rather than just for pleasure. And I've found so much more pleasure out of having uh, to do that. And some of the pairings that I do in my events, I've done 100 times now, and when I play the music and I drink the beer, I'm still surprised that I can taste the difference. It actually works. I go, God, I'm not making this up. It is real. And so I've found that doing this makes music sound better to me. And there's another big trick going on here, which is that normally when we're listening to music and tasting it, it's all about that thing about context again. We're probably doing something else. And when you do this, you're focusing on the beer and on the music. You're really concentrating on it at the same time. So because you're doing that, you get things that you don't normally get. You hear things and you taste things that maybe have passed you by before. So that definitely happens. Um, Thoughts or research on different styles of music going with different beers? It's an interesting one. Um, I think the answer to that is that different styles of music tend to have different characteristics. It's about the characteristics rather than the genre. I think the interesting one there is that people tend to think of if you're going to play heavy metal, if you're going to play Iron Maiden, that's going to be a black beer. It's going to be a dark beer. And actually, when you use the science, it's not. It's a blonde beer that goes with heavy metal. The imagery of heavy metal is dark and black, but actually the sound of it is pale and blonde. How are we doing? Rick Astley might be a bit disappointed. He's not in it. Um, I think he'll be all right. Tina. We did talk about it. The beer that he brewed with his brewery is definitely kind of pairs with his music. Um, as a Peter Olding, as a camera tasting panel member and once did champion beer of Britain judging. So how much should I be considering the background sounds when judging a beer and how it changes my perception of the beer? I think this is really important. When you're doing professional beer judging, uh, you sort of say, well, I don't don't wear perfume because that influences your perception of aroma and flavor. Um, your surroundings have a massive impact on how you taste. If the room is cold and dark, it's going to be different than if the room is bright and warm. And a lot of beer judging that I've done has been in under quite noisy conditions. And the last competition I judged, yeah, was in a brew pub, and the music that was playing was really getting in the way of tasting. It was so loud, I couldn't actually get a deliberate focus on the taste. I think it should be, yeah, tasting should be if you're judging a competition, it should be as quiet as possible, definitely. But I think the great thing here for the secret weapon here for anyone who's doing beer tastings is, if you want to sell more IPA, play a different kind of music than if you want to sell more stout. Brett says, I've found that there is no direct correlation between liking a type of beer and liking a beer. Sometimes a beer can improve even when I dislike the music. I mean, that proves that it works, really. If you like the beer and you like the music, you're gonna. It's this. There's even a scientific word for that. It's called hedonic transference. If you love the beer and you're neutral about the music, or vice versa, the one you love is going to change your perception of the other one. So if it's a style of beer or a style of music that you don't even like and you're still getting the effect, that proves it's real. Again. All right,
Brilliant.
found
Oh yeah, I just corrected myself because
right.
I said liking a beer and liking I meant liking a beer and liking the music. Uh, Cohen's got a question for you, Pete.
Mm. Few breweries who have, for example, Spotify scan mode on the can that goes along with the beer. Yeah, I mean, quite a few brewers are doing this. I know there's a brewer in Italy who plays certain types of music to his beers while they're fermenting. Um, and there's a physics angle to that about back to kind of sound waves and pressure and so on. But I think quite a few people work this relationship out on a non-scientific on the early stages. I was talking about the sort of intuitive side of it. Signature Brew here in the UK do a very similar thing, and I've got a pairing in the book where they made a nitro stout, and each beer they have a small Spotify playlist of about 6 or 7 songs for each beer, and some of them are obvious. If you got a smooth nitro stout, smooth, dark, chocolatey, um, there's a certain style of soulful, mellow music that goes with that. Um, and a lot of songs that are written like there's a style of music that goes with ads for chocolate. TV ads for chocolate always have kind of smooth, mellow strings and soulful vocals because it's chocolatey. So there's a lot of stuff that does go on that level, and I guess what we're doing here is finding out. some of the science behind it and how that works. But the main thing really is to have some fun with it, really.
Brilliant. I think that we've got one comment from Wolfgang.
Yeah,
But otherwise, Pete, do you want to just take that one as the last question and then we'll.
sure. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Well, I find if I concentrate on live music, so I can pick out the individual instruments. Oh, we're all going now. I could do similar to beer, pick out individual notes, 1 + 1 = 3. Absolutely, absolutely. A big chunk of it is about that focus. And one thing I've learned from this myself is to spend more time focusing when I'm doing this, to spend more time, more of my brain on listening and tasting and closing everything else out. We often had this conversation with my wife that um, 20 years ago, she would put headphones on and lie on the sofa and listen to an album from start to finish. When do any of us do that anymore? Now, I imagine doing that with a beer that's been chosen to go with the album and just lying there or sitting there and just thinking about the music, what you can pick out in the music, what you can pick out in the beer. It's something we should spend more time doing. Uh, this should be taught to every band making a band label beer. They always tend to make a beer we like to drink at the backstage instead of matching music. Johnny, that's in my experience. Even bands that make, I've spoken to quite a few of them about this. Even bands that make music that's quite confrontational, I guess, or quite alternative. When it comes to making a beer, they want to make a beer that everyone wants to drink. So Tina's comment earlier, I interviewed Rick Astley for the Sunday Times. He is in a joint venture with Mikkeller, with a couple of with a brew pub and a bar in London. Um, it's an adventure for him, but when choosing what beer they were going to make, it's like, well, I just want a beer that people can drink, and bands tend to do that pretty much universally, which is like if you ever get a band brewed beer, a beer that's linked to a band, it's probably going to be a pale ale about 4%. They nearly always do. They nearly always go for that. Uh, I first saw your beer music tasting at GBF 2023. It was great actually hearing the music and tasting the specific beer. Shame it can't be done virtually. This is the thing. It's uh, given that this is being recorded, if I was to play music on this, it would be taken down from YouTube within minutes, and I would be prosecuted for it. We even had to kind of technically, it's illegal for me to put album covers in the book. Uh, Record labels are still kind of too litigious. So, like I say, it's a shame we couldn't do the actual pairings online. But if you can't get to one of my events, then do get the playlist and buy some of the beers and try it out with friends as well. Uh, Peter Olding, I don't know, listen to sea shanties, but at Norwich Beer Festival, the Shantymen again, beer and music pairing and context as well. Brett can't imagine the Fall making Doom Bar. The Fall's music, atonal, dissonant. The Fall, I actually play the Fall sometimes when I'm pairing with sour beers.
Brilliant. Thanks, Pete. That's superb. A good place to end. Thanks, everyone. If you'd like to unmute yourself and give Pete sort of a thumbs up or a round of applause, that'd be much appreciated. Cheers, Pete, and we'll see you soon. And this will be recorded and made available on YouTube as usual. Cheers, Pete.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye. Have a good
Thank
evening,
you.
everybody.
Cheers.